I donated, sold, and discarded over 90% of my personal belongings. Welcome to the Leading Presence podcast. I'm your host, Geraldine. This is your time to explore where you are, where you want to go, and how you'll get there. Let's build a life you love. Please make sure to follow the Leading Presence podcast and leave a review so you don't miss an episode. If you've been meaning to organize and declutter a room, a drawer, or even a corner of your home, I understand where you're coming from. It can be exhausting to walk into a room at the end of a long day and see the same pile of things sitting on a chair or stacked on a corner table. If organizing and decluttering is on your mind, this episode is about 10 minutes long. This is your sign to declutter for 10 minutes. Leave a review at the end of the episode to let me know how it went. In the span of 3 months, I donated, sold, and discarded over 90% of my personal belongings. So believe me when I say I know how it feels. The process of organizing and decluttering my home started when I decided to take a gap year. So this is essentially a break from everything. For me, it was a break from work because I wasn't a new grad by any means. I didn't just graduate. I was fully engaged in my HR career. So at the time, I was traveling weekly through northern British Columbia. It was a part of my job. And this meant that I would pack up my things on a Sunday, travel from Monday to Thursday, sometimes Friday. Over the weekend, I would either visit my boyfriend or I would stay with my mom for a weekend visit. And then boom, start my week all over again. I truly love that role. I love the rigor of traveling, but 3 years of living in a suitcase, carrying a laptop bag and a purse really taught me that as long as I have access to a place where I can eat, sleep, use the washroom, and connect with people, everything I actually need was in that suitcase and laptop bag. And I don't know if you've ever lived alone, but there's a profound lesson to be learned from realizing that nothing moves unless you move it when you live alone. So whether it's a cup, a piece of fruit, or a stack of books, unless you change something in your living space, it remains the same. So in my home, when you first come inside, there's a small nook and it acts as a built-in desk. So living alone, I took a lot of care organizing and decluttering the desk to make sure I knew where everything was. There was a space for batteries, pens, envelopes, and the list goes on. But this is what I learned. I never used any of this stuff. Essentially, it became a little museum of all of the office supplies that I'd collected over time. And yes, I kept the loveliest paper clips, but if you don't use the paper clips, what is the point of keeping them there? Again, it's a museum of paper clips for someone who lives alone. What's the point of that? So when I decided to take a gap year to travel the world and spend time with family, I also decided that I didn't want to leave this museum of things waiting idle for me during that 12 months. I didn't want to return to the same accidental monument of personal things just waiting to be used or possibly reorganized. It just seemed a little bit silly to me. I actually wanted to give myself the mental space knowing that there weren't all these things waiting for me. And more than that, I wanted the clarity of knowing that anything could happen in that 12 months because I wasn't focused on returning to these things. I allowed myself to be open to whatever came next, and so I was no longer tethered to my stuff. Organizing and decluttering really flew by once I had my goal. I aimed to donate, sell, or discard everything I owned except for personal items that I could travel with. This was really what I wanted to achieve. This meant 2 suitcases, a carry-on suitcase, and a personal item. Week after week, I would go through a section of my home and evaluate what went where. I had a number of reusable shopping bags that were stored, as well as some boxes and some organizing things that I used as storage. So I had a car, but I didn't really drive that often because I was working from home when I wasn't on the road. So the car really became my donation hub, to be honest. I would store things in my car that were marked for donation, and at the end of the week, I would empty my car essentially at a local consignment store. Looking back, I started in the office mostly because I realized that things just weren't moving, so I knew that most of these things could be donated. I did keep one small case or little box of office supplies, especially when I found stamps, things like that. But from the office, I moved along to the next space I felt comfortable tackling, which was my kitchen. I love to cook and I love to entertain, but with this passion and joy came a lot of gadgets that I tried, washed, packed, and then they just never saw the light of day again. I also had special items like a full set of formal cutlery. And then again, I still had some of that banged up old cutlery from my university days. It's kind of the stuff that you keep around so that if you're traveling like me, if you're moving around, or even just packing lunch, if I bring this really ugly fork and it gets lost, it's not going to break my heart. So why did I keep it? Why would I have things that just don't really matter? Truly, how many utensils does one human being need when they wash their dishes daily and use a dishwasher? Then again, I can say that this is where it gets tricky. There's minimalism and extreme minimalism. Minimalism taught me that I feel good with a set of plates. I don't need to have a full set of holiday plates or spring plates. Like, I don't need to have kind of Christmas tree plates and then snowflake plates and then something with lemons. But it also taught me that I'm not an extreme minimalist. I don't want to own just one plate or one plate per person in the household. I like having a full set. So if you're trying to understand the difference between minimalism, where you're trying to live with less and mindfully decide how many things you want to own, extreme minimalism is really when you push the boundaries to see how little can I live with. And for me, although I like the challenge of saving, of being frugal, at some point down the line, it just isn't for me. I live more like a minimalist than an extreme minimalist. I really like the concept of being frugal and pushing yourself to the limits to see what makes sense. But for me, my preference and comfort is minimalism as opposed to extreme minimalism. On the one hand, I really like the idea of challenging myself to keep only the things I would travel with. On the other hand, I decided to follow some advice of other folks my age who traveled for a year and came home. I remember seeing a video that I can't find anymore, but this really sweet couple were kind of looking at each other and they just laughed and said, we don't even have a frying pan. And I remember thinking to myself, all right, as much as I want to start with a clean slate, I really mean that metaphorically. I don't mean that I want to start at point zero where I'm building my life from zero. That's just really not what happened. I still had my career to come home to. I still had my same education. It's not like that got erased just because I went away for a year. So why would I do the same with all of my personal items? So ultimately, I decided to keep enough personal items so that when my future husband and I returned home, we wouldn't feel like we were starting over completely, like we were in the dark. So in the kitchen, really, I kept 2 plates. I kept a set of utensils, the best frying pan I had, my really good pot, a grill, a set of cooking utensils, a hand blender, and some oven mitts that were a gift and still had the tag on them. Honestly, everything else went. And I did keep some things with friends and family who were interested in trying them. So this includes things like my air fryer, my Instant Pot, and my Nespresso machine. I didn't just leave them on the side of the road. I checked around to see who would want to try these things and certainly let them use them. To be honest, I don't think I'm ever going to get my Nespresso machine back, but that's okay. I did travel around with my French press, and that's just a personal choice. You do you. So again, remember, I was starting on the adventure of a lifetime. I can't imagine coming home and thinking, oh, cool, there's my Nespresso. It's been waiting for me. As much as I enjoy certain coffees, not as much as knowing that somebody else was using it as opposed to letting it sit idle for a year. And really thinking back to kitchen items, it's funny to me, I don't really buy a lot when I'm traveling. I want to buy a lot, but it's just, I avoid it just because it's heavy or I'm trying to avoid the expense. But things that I do tend to buy are side plates. I really wanted to buy some plates in Japan. In India, I did buy copper bowls, and when I return, I'd really love to bring home copper cups. These are really great examples, though, of how important it was for me to let go of my older things before I left, because holding on to them just meant that I had something to come home to. It didn't mean that I would use them in the future. In fact, I'm telling you, I want to buy something else. So if anything, if there was an item I didn't let go of before I left, I ended up donating it later. This is actually what I found with a lot of my clothes. And it's funny, decluttering clothing was an adventure because I felt like I was preparing to live in any season. I just didn't know exactly where in the world we would be. So I knew that our first destination was Dubai, and so that meant living in a place where it's a very sometimes dry, sometimes humid, usually very hot climate. All right, I might have been wrong. We've just reached the 10-minute mark. So, number one, if you have been organizing and decluttering, congratulations. Take a moment and realize that you actually did some of that work. Number two, if you must stop, go for it. You can deal with the rest when you're ready. If you feel like you can continue, continue. You got this. But this doesn't necessarily mean tank tops and shorts or skirts every day. I was interested in networking and exploring formal venues like 5-star hotels and places like mosques, so I needed lightweight clothing that wasn't too warm. On the other hand, we had plans to visit India for Diwali. Contrary to the majority of the photos of India that I see at home, they experience a range of weather patterns in India, depending on where you are. I'll never forget visiting India in February. It was the same temperature the day that I arrived in New Delhi as it was when I left Vancouver. It was 9 degrees Celsius and cold. I was actually wearing a jacket, and I remember actually my boss was the one who said, make sure you bring a jacket. And I thought, how ridiculous is that? But my goodness, I would have been freezing without it. And then there are cultural clothes. It's a respectful gesture to wear Indian clothes while I'm visiting my partner's family. But of course, they take up space. So I started with selecting 2 of every kind of clothing. From there, I considered whether I had enough formal wear and enough casual, comfortable wear to feel like myself. So 2 long sleeve shirts, 2 dresses, 2 cultural outfits, pants, etc. I also evaluated whether the combination would let me mix and match. I didn't want to have anything where it couldn't mix with anything else. Same thing went with holiday wear. So ugly sweaters and all that good stuff. I only kept 2 seasonal items and everything else went. There's tons of tips and tricks to selling your things, but for me, the bottom line was that I had a deadline. I didn't want to feel overwhelmed or resentful by the experience, and I wanted to respect my things. At first, I posted a lot of things on Facebook Marketplace. So formal shoes, leather jackets, teacups, furniture, you name it. Anything that I thought would garner interest. Suddenly, I started getting check-in messages from old friends I hadn't heard from in a long time and family, and I didn't realize that they were getting concerned. All they could see was that I was selling my things, and it was a funny moment where I realized, this seemed totally rational to me, but I could see how it would be concerning for someone who had no idea what my actually optimistic plans were for the next year. It actually took much more time and a little bit more work than I expected to sell my things. So I developed a strict process. Throughout my week, I would post items for sale, so upload photos, write descriptions, and if they weren't sold and picked up by the end of the week, they were donated. No exceptions. And I know this might sound extreme because, of course, you can make a lot of money off of the items that you already own. But when you're in the process of organizing and decluttering, the pile of these are going to get picked up or the pile of hoping to be sold for X amount, it really gets in your way fast. If you've decided to organize and declutter your personal items, try to make peace with the fact that you're letting go, where letting go here doesn't mean expecting a reward in exchange. You're letting it go. So going through 3 months of organizing and decluttering more than 90% of my personal items, these are my practical tips that I have to share with you so you can go forth and put them into action. So number 1, set a timer for decluttering. And I'm not saying make this a marathon. Pick a number. Put on a timer for 5 minutes. You can get so much more done in 5 minutes than you know. 5 minutes of decluttering is far more productive than 5 days of avoiding a scary pile of stuff. Set a timer, go for it. You can do it. Tip number 2, take photos to remember the memories. When you're organizing and decluttering so many of your personal items, it really does help to take photos as you go. I mean, the other thing too is that you're going to sell some of them, so there's that. But allow yourself to remember when you wore those shoes or when you bought those earrings. If you're like me, you'll be shocked at what you actually kept. Like these are things that you probably didn't even use again, or perhaps you used and you thought you would use again, and you never did. It's okay. You're going to let them go. Let the next person enjoy the item as much as you did back then. Tip number 3 is to focus on who you are now rather than who you were before. I have a confession. I have a collection of Babysitter's Club Little Sister books that I almost donated, almost sold, and then decided to keep. It's about 25 books that fit in a reusable bag. I haven't read them since I was a preteen, although I used to read them. And while I was ready to let them go, my mom happened to remind me, well, what if you have a daughter? Wouldn't you like to share them with her? And so, to be honest, I kept them for that reason. But I'll leave you with this thought. Books are made of paper, which decompose over time. So make sure you keep the books that are truly important to you and make sure they're stored well. Tip number 4 is to take breaks and give yourself time. This is exhausting business. You're evaluating things, remembering things, and physically moving things around. It's actually a lot of work. So make sure you're not doing everything at once if you're organizing and decluttering your entire home. Mentally and physically, it's a lot, so take breaks. You're worth it. Tip number 5 is to invite friends and family to visit. Not only is this good for your mental health, you get to share in all those memories that your really ridiculous short skirts or really high-heeled shoes bring up, but to be honest, it saves a lot of time. Imagine the time it takes to box up all of the clothes you decide to donate, or bring over a friend, let them peek through everything and decide what they're going to take. They're not necessarily going to take things that fit them. They might be taking things for other people, or they might actually be willing to take things over for donation for you. What a gift. So bring people over, let them in, and then that way they can see you're okay. Just because you're selling all this stuff, donating all this stuff, doesn't mean there's a problem. Allow people to come in. They'd love to see you. The next tip is to keep the high quality items that you will use. This concept might be self-explanatory, but I'll give you an odd example. When I was backpacking through Europe in my 20s, my friends and I would actually carry with us old and used items because it meant that they were disposable. So an old ripped t-shirt was eventually replaced with a new blouse from France. But if you choose to keep your high quality items, your expectations change. It feels better, it's airier, and I'm less likely to purchase things while I'm traveling. You already bought the good stuff, so why would you let those ones go? If you think you're going to use them, keep the higher quality items. Before starting this adventure, I truly watched a lot of YouTube videos and listened to a lot of podcast episodes because I wanted to learn from people who gave away so many of their things. And what they tended to say again and again was that I never said I wish I had that item still. And there's one item for me that comes to mind. It's a purple raincoat that I bought from Costco in Hawaii. It was purple, which is my favorite color. It fit into a small carry bag, which I still use. Both the bag and the raincoat were waterproof, and I probably bought it for $30 and I probably sold it for about $10. So as someone who was planning to take a year off work, I was happy with the $10. I knew I'd spend it for sure. And I was honestly never in a situation where I was in a cold, rainy place where I needed the coat. I was actually in the Philippines when I thought about it. It was summertime. It was so humid that the rain felt good on my face. I was actually in an area called 100 Islands, and I swam in the ocean with my husband, and the rain was pouring down on us. I thought about the raincoat, but I certainly didn't need it. As someone who recently donated, sold, and discarded over 90% of my personal belongings over 3 months, these are my tips for organizing and decluttering. Number 1, set a timer for decluttering. Let yourself be amazed at how much you can do in a short period of time. Number 2, take photos to remember the memories. Photos help you keep the memory and let go of the item. Number 3, focus on who you are now rather than who you were before. Keep the things that reflect your current lifestyle because it's more likely that you'll use it. Number 4, take breaks and give yourself time. This is very important because it can be exhausting work. Number 5, invite friends and family to visit. They help save time and it helps to share the memories. And number 6, keep the high quality items that you will use. You already bought the good stuff, so why keep the lower quality items? If you heard something that connected with you, please share this podcast with a friend. Until next week, take good care.